The illusion of normalcy, hooking the audience from the start. The late afternoon sun bathed Madison Avenue in gold, reflecting off the pristine glass windows of Kingston Jewelers, one of the most prestigious jewelry stores in New York City. The kind of place where power and status weren't just expected, they were demanded. Inside, the air was thick with exclusivity, plush velvet cases, shimmering diamond displays, and hushed voices speaking in measured tones. Every inch of this store whispered wealth. And yet, Monica Carter felt a shift in the air the moment she stepped through the door. She wasn't just any customer, she was a renowned civil rights attorney. A woman who had spent years fighting against discrimination and injustice. But today, she wasn't here to fight. She was here for something much more personal, to find the perfect anniversary gift for her husband. David Carter. A diamond pendant caught her eye, timeless, elegant, just like their 10 years together. As she reached out to get a closer look, a voice sliced through the quiet. "Can I help you?" Monica turned. The sales associate, Heather Wilson, stood behind the counter. Tall, blonde, polished. She had the poised smile of someone who had been trained in customer service, but not for customers like Monica. Monica gave a polite nod. "Yes, I'd like to see this necklace." Heather hesitated. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Monica noticed it immediately. The quick glance up and down. The flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt. Then, the question. "That's quite an expensive piece. Are you sure you can afford it?" The words were casually cruel, coated in a thin veneer of politeness. Monica felt the room shrink. She had fought battles in courtrooms filled with powerful men trying to silence her. She had stood before judges, arguing for those who had been wrongfully accused. But here, in this moment, she wasn't an attorney. Fire if you believe Monica deserves justice. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think this was just a misunderstanding. Comment 0, or if you have no words. Hit subscribe to see how this unfolds. Loudspeaker, don't let these stories go unheard. Like and share this video to support the movement. Lightbulb, join us at rvmblackstruggles for more powerful stories like this, because every voice matters. She was just another black woman being questioned in a place she had every right to be. A few other customers subtly glanced her way. A quiet shift in the atmosphere. The unspoken assumption that maybe, just maybe, Heather was right. Monica exhaled slowly, keeping her voice calm. "Yes, I'm sure." Heather gave a tight smile. As if unconvinced, with slow, deliberate movements, she unlocked the glass case and lifted the necklace out. Monica reached for it, but just before she could admire it, Heather suddenly snatched it back. "Actually," she said, her voice louder now, enough for other customers to hear, "I think it's best if we put this back." Then Monica saw it. Heather's discreet hand signal. A security guard was already walking toward them. In mere seconds, her entire world had shifted. And Monica had no idea just how deep the conspiracy against her ran. The public humiliation. The tension in Kingston Jewelers thickened like a storm cloud. Customers who had been browsing suddenly paused, their curious gazes flicking toward the unfolding scene. Monica Carter had been in courtrooms where entire jury panels scrutinized her every move. But standing in the middle of this opulent jewelry store, she felt something much worse, the weight of silent judgment. The security guard, Officer James Nolan, a broad-shouldered man in a dark uniform, closed the distance fast. "Is there a problem here?" his deep voice carried across the store. Heather Wilson, the sales associate, straightened her posture, adopting the composed expression of a wronged employee. "Yes, there is," Heather announced, her voice slightly raised so the whole store could hear. "This woman was trying to steal that necklace." A gasp rippled through the store. Monica's breath caught in her throat. Trying to steal? The accusation was so outlandish, so insulting, that for a brief moment, she couldn't process it. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, in the eyes of everyone watching, she was already guilty. "Excuse me?" Monica said, keeping her voice steady. "I never." Officer Nolan raised a hand. His expression was neutral, but there was no doubt, he had already decided how this was going to go. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said. Monica stared at him, willing herself to stay composed. She could demand to see the security footage. She could call her husband right now. She could fight back, but she knew how these situations played out. A black woman raising her voice? That was all the justification some people needed to turn this into something even worse. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man pull out his phone. Recording. "You're making a mistake," Monica said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "If there's been a mistake, we'll clear it up," Nolan responded, his tone flat. "Let's handle this professionally." Professionally? This wasn't professionalism, this was a public humiliation. But Monica had no choice. She lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness. "Fine," she said, her voice full of controlled fury. "Let's go." The moment she turned to leave, she heard the whispers start. I knew something was off about her. She didn't look like she belonged here. Probably one of those rich types who think they can get away with anything. Monica felt each word like a blade, slicing away at her dignity. But she refused to let them see her break. As she walked toward the security office, escorted like a criminal, the heavy doors of Kingston Jewelers swung shut behind her. And she had no idea that her humiliation was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. The truth comes out, but the damage is done. The security office was cold, sterile. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a harsh glow over the cheap wooden desk and outdated monitors displaying the store's security feeds. Monica Carter sat stiffly in the metal chair, her arms crossed, her pulse pounding. Across from her, Officer James Nolan was reviewing footage, his brows furrowed. The room was silent except for the occasional click of the mouse as Nolan scrubbed through the security tapes. Monica stared straight ahead, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She had spent years in courtrooms, tearing apart weak evidence, exposing bias, dismantling baseless accusations. And yet, here she was, on the other side, a black woman accused of theft, sitting in a security office like a common criminal. Outside, her reputation was already being decided. She could feel it happening. The customers in the store, the whispers, the way people's eyes narrowed as she was escorted through the halls like she had already been convicted. It didn't matter that she was innocent. The accusation was enough. "This should only take a minute," Nolan muttered, eyes still locked on the screen. Monica didn't respond. She didn't trust herself to speak. Then, Nolan suddenly stopped the video. His entire body stiffened. He leaned in closer, staring at the screen. Then, without looking at Monica, he hit rewind, watching something again. The room was completely silent except for the sound of the footage replaying. Finally, Nolan sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. "We reviewed the footage." His voice was quieter now, less authoritative. Monica held his gaze, waiting. "You didn't steal anything. You're free to go." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she had just been put through. Just a dismissal. Monica felt a fire ignite inside her. "That's it?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Nolan exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, I was just following protocol." Protocol. That word tasted like poison. She had spent years fighting against systems that used that excuse: courtrooms, corporate boardrooms, police departments, even luxury stores like this. Now, she was another statistic. "I'd like to speak to your superior," she said, her tone controlled but firm. Nolan hesitated. "That won't be necessary." Monica stood up, her blood boiling. But before she could say another word, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, and her stomach dropped when she saw the name on the screen. David Carter, her husband, a man who wasn't just a successful businessman. He was the owner of the entire shopping mall. She answered immediately. "Where are you?" David's voice was tight with anger. "The mall security just called me." Monica's breath hitched. She had been trying to hold it together, trying to stay calm, but suddenly, she felt something shift inside her. Because David was on his way. And now? Now, Kingston Jewelers was about to realize exactly who they had just humiliated. A powerful ally steps in. Monica stood in the middle of the security office, arms crossed, her phone still clutched in her hand, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest. But she refused to let it consume her. Because now, David Carter was on his way. And Kingston Jewelers had no idea who they had just messed with. The walls of the security office suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Officer Nolan cleared his throat. "You're free to go, ma'am." Monica let out a sharp laugh. But there was no humor in it. "Oh, I know I'm free to go," she said, "but this isn't over." She turned on her heel and marched out of the office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. By the time she stepped back into the main shopping area, heads turned, shoppers were still whispering, some were watching from a distance, and she spotted at least 2 people recording with their phones. Her face was everywhere now. Her reputation was already being rewritten by the court of public opinion. Then, the glass doors swung open, and there he was, David Carter, standing tall, dressed in a tailored navy suit, exuding power in a way that made people take notice. His presence wasn't just commanding, it was undeniable. Shoppers instinctively moved aside, sensing the shift in energy. David's sharp, calculating eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. Monica saw the moment his expression hardened, his jaw clenching with barely restrained fury. He strode toward her, fast, purposeful. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, controlled, but dangerous. Monica exhaled. "I'm fine, but I want to leave this place in flames." David turned, his expression darkening as his gaze fell on Heather Wilson, the sales associate who had falsely accused Monica. Heather's smug confidence from earlier was gone. Now, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Sir, she started, but David ignored her completely. His focus had already shifted to the store manager, Claire Benson, who had just emerged from her office. Claire was a woman in her early 50s, dressed in a sleek black dress, her short platinum hair cut into an expensive bob. She sized up David instantly, trying to determine whether he was a threat or a problem to be managed. "She chose wrong, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone all business. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." David let out a slow, measured breath. "Misunderstanding?" he repeated. "That's what you're calling this?" Claire folded her hands in front of her, as if she were the reasonable one in the room. "I understand your wife feels she was treated unfairly, but our employees followed store protocol. If she felt uncomfortable, we sincerely apologize." Monica felt her stomach turn. There it was, that perfectly packaged corporate response, designed to sound polite, while taking no real accountability. David tilted his head slightly. "Apologizing for how she felt, not for what you actually did?" Claire blinked rapidly, realizing too late that David Carter was not a man to be dismissed. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, stop talking." His voice dropped to a deadly calm, and Claire visibly swallowed. The room was so silent. Monica could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. "Do you know who I am?" David finally asked. Claire hesitated, then gave a tight, rehearsed smile. "Of course, you're one of our valued customers." David let out a dry chuckle. "Wrong," he said. "I own this mall." Heather let out a small gasp. Claire's entire face paled. David took a step closer, towering over her now. "And do you know what that means?" Claire didn't answer, so David answered for her. "It means I decide who stays here and who doesn't." Heather's hand shot up to her mouth, as if she had just realized exactly how badly she had screwed up. Monica watched, fascinated, as Claire struggled to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, we deeply regret any offense your wife may have taken." "Taken?" David cut in. His voice was soft, but lethal. "You accused my wife of theft. You humiliated her. You paraded her through my mall like a criminal. So let me make one thing very, very clear." He took another step forward, closing the distance. "You work for me." Claire physically flinched. "And you just made the worst business decision of your life." Monica could have cheered. David wasn't done yet. "Heather Wilson is terminated immediately," he said coldly. "I don't want her working in any store in this building again." Heather sputtered, her face flushing red with panic. "Wait, please." David ignored her. "As for you, Claire, you have 2 choices." Claire stiffened. "You can resign today," David said, "or I will personally ensure that your career in retail is over. Permanently." The entire store was frozen. Heather looked ready to cry. Claire looked like she might pass out. And Monica? For the first time since this nightmare had started, she finally felt like she was winning. Claire's mouth opened and closed, her brain desperately searching for an escape route. But there was none. Not against David Carter. Not when he held all the power now. And just like that, the balance had shifted. The confrontation, the fight for justice begins. First climax, the battle escalates. The silence in Kingston Jewelers was thick with tension. David Carter stood tall, exuding authority and power. His piercing eyes locked onto Claire Benson, the store manager who had allowed his wife to be publicly humiliated. Behind them, Heather Wilson, the sales associate who had falsely accused Monica, was visibly shaking, her hands clenched into fists as if praying for a way out. But there was no way out. Not anymore. Monica stood beside her husband, arms crossed, chin high. She wasn't just here to witness this, she was here to finish it. Claire swallowed hard. She started, her voice cracking slightly. David cut her off. Resignation or termination, those are your choices. And if you think for a second that I won't follow through, try me. Claire's face flushed, a mix of humiliation and fear creeping into her features. This wasn't just about losing a job, this was about losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her status in the retail world. And she knew it. Monica watched every flicker of emotion that crossed the woman's face. First, defiance, as if she was about to argue. Then, realization, as she remembered who she was dealing with. Finally, defeat. Claire exhaled sharply, looking down at the gleaming jewelry case like it might somehow save her. Fine, she muttered. I'll resign. David nodded once, satisfied. Effective immediately, he clarified. And don't think about trying to slip into another position in this mall. I'll be watching. Claire said nothing. Heather, still standing frozen, let out a tiny gasp, her own fate hanging by a thread. David turned his attention to her. And you, he said coolly. Heather took a step back, as if she could physically retreat from the consequences. I was just following store policy. Monica let out a sharp laugh, cutting her off. Store policy? She echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. Your store policy is to accuse paying customers of theft? To have them dragged out in front of everyone like criminals? Heather's face crumbled, her composure breaking under the weight of her own actions. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But you let it, Monica snapped. Heather flinched. David's expression darkened further. You've already been fired, he said simply. Heather let out a soft, strangled noise, her eyes wide with horror. No, please, she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. David didn't blink. Get out, he said. Heather didn't move. Now, Heather let out a shaky breath, her shoulders collapsing forward as she realized that there was no fighting this. She turned and walked out of Kingston Jewelers, her once superior smirk now replaced with pure humiliation. As soon as the doors shut behind her, a slow murmur spread through the store. Shoppers who had witnessed the spectacle began whispering, a few of them even filming the aftermath on their phones. Monica wasn't sure how many people would see this moment, but she was sure of one thing. This wasn't over, because there was something bigger at play here. The unraveling of a bigger conspiracy. As David turned back to Monica, his expression softened slightly, but she could see the lingering anger in his eyes. Are you okay? He asked her quietly. Monica nodded. I will be, but something isn't right. David frowned. What do you mean? Monica glanced toward Officer James Nolan, the security guard who had detained her earlier. He had been silent this entire time, watching the confrontation unfold. She turned to him now. You knew I wasn't guilty, she said. I saw it in your face when you watched the footage. But you still let it happen. Why? Nolan hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he sighed and rubbed his forehead. Because I had orders, he admitted, his voice lower now, as if he didn't want others to overhear. Monica's stomach tightened. Orders from who? David pressed. Nolan looked at them both. Then at Claire, who was still standing there stone-faced, trying to pretend she wasn't listening. Then, finally, he spoke the name that changed everything. Richard Evans. The second Monica heard it, her entire body went cold. She turned to David, who had suddenly gone rigid, his jaw clenching. Richard Evans? Monica repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. Nolan nodded. He's been trying to take over this mall for years, he muttered, and it looks like he decided to play dirty. Monica felt her heartbeat hammer in her ears. Richard Evans wasn't just any businessman. He was a ruthless corporate mogul who had been trying to force David to sell this mall for years. And now, it all made sense. This wasn't just a case of racial profiling. This was a calculated move to create a scandal, to damage David's reputation and force him out of business. They had set Monica up. And suddenly, she realized, This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about power, corruption, and control. David exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. This just got a lot bigger than I thought, he muttered. Monica's mind raced. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. And now, they had to fight back. The battle against corruption begins. Second climax, the real enemy revealed. Monica Carter stood in the middle of Kingston Jewelers, her heart hammering in her chest. Richard Evans. The name alone sent a fresh wave of fury through her. This wasn't just a racial profiling incident gone too far. This was a calculated attack, a deliberate move to create a scandal that could destroy David's reputation and force him to sell his mall. And she had been the pawn in Evans' twisted little game. David, standing beside her, was dead silent, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might crack. Richard Evans did this? Monica asked Officer Nolan, her voice dangerously low. Nolan nodded, shifting uncomfortably. He's been trying to push Mr. Carter out for years, he muttered. And when the business negotiations didn't work, he must have decided to go after his public image instead. Monica felt rage coil in her chest. So he used Kingston Jewelers to stage a fake scandal? That's exactly what he did, Nolan admitted. Claire Benson here has been taking incentives from Evans for months. Monica's head snapped toward Claire. The store manager, who had just moments ago been begging to resign quietly, stood frozen, her face pale as all eyes landed on her. David let out a low, humorless chuckle. Wow, he murmured, shaking his head. So this wasn't just about my wife. This was about destroying my entire business. Claire opened her mouth, as if searching for a defense. But before she could speak, David turned to Monica. We're going after Evans, he said simply. And just like that, the real war began. The first strike, taking control of the narrative. By the time Monica and David left Kingston Jewelers, the damage control had already begun. Monica's phone exploded with calls, some from reporters who had already caught wind of the viral videos, some from business associates, some from civil rights activists who were ready to take action. David's team mobilized within minutes. His public relations firm drafted a statement exposing Kingston Jewelers and their history of discrimination, carefully crafted to redirect the scandal back onto them. But that wasn't enough. Monica wanted blood, and she knew exactly where to strike. Uncovering the corruption. Over the next 24 hours, Monica worked non-stop. She called in every favor she had, digging deep into Richard Evans' business dealings. And what she found was darker than she ever expected. Evans had a long history of shady takeovers, using public scandals, bribery, and intimidation to force competitors out of business. But this time, he had picked the wrong couple to mess with. The perfect trap. David's legal team drafted a lawsuit against Kingston Jewelers for racial discrimination and defamation, and named Richard Evans as a co-conspirator. Monica went a step further. She arranged a private meeting with Evans, one he never saw coming. The showdown with Richard Evans. The next afternoon, Monica and David sat in a high-rise conference room, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Evans finally walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, exuding arrogance in an expensive suit that reeked of old money and corruption. He smirked as he took his seat across from them. "Ah, David," he drawled, "I heard you had a bit of an incident yesterday. Such a shame. Kingston Jewelers was always such a fine establishment." Monica had to bite her tongue to keep from lunging across the table. David, however, remained calm and lethal. "Cut the act, Evans," he said. "We know it was you." Evans' smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said smoothly. Monica leaned forward, her eyes burning with fury. "You bribed Kingston Jewelers to set me up," she said, "and now, we have proof." Evans laughed. "Please," he scoffed. "Do you really think some racial discrimination case is going to take me down? I have teams of lawyers who will bury this before it even reaches a judge." David smiled. "That's the thing," he said, pulling out a sleek folder and sliding it across the table. "This isn't just about discrimination anymore." Evans hesitated. Slowly, he opened the folder. His face darkened immediately. Inside were documents linking him to illegal business practices, fraudulent takeovers, and bribery scandals. Evans' fingers tightened on the papers. "Where did you get this?" he hissed. David leaned back, completely at ease. Does it matter? Monica crossed her arms. Here's how this is going to go. She said coolly. You're going to release a public statement apologizing for what happened to me. You're going to admit that Kingston Jewelers engaged in discriminatory practices. And you're going to donate a sizable sum to organizations that fight racial injustice. Evan's face was flushed with rage. And if I don't? He growled. David smiled again. Then by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in this country is going to have those documents. Evans was breathing heavily now, his arrogance finally cracking under the weight of the trap they had set. For the first time in his life, he had been outplayed. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, Evans exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Fine, he spat. I'll do it. Monica tilted her head. Say it louder, Richard, she taunted. Evans' nostrils flared. I'll do it, he repeated, through clenched teeth. David leaned forward, his tone deadly calm. Good choice. And just like that, they had won. The fallout. Within 48 hours, Richard Evans was publicly disgraced. Kingston Jewelers issued an official apology. But it wasn't enough to save them. Customers boycotted, investors pulled out, and within a week, the store had permanently shut down. As for Evans, his corporate empire began to crumble, as more of his dirty business deals came to light. And Monica? She had turned her worst humiliation into her greatest victory. The backlash, the battle isn't over yet. Unexpected setback, more enemies emerge. Monica Carter had expected some pushback. After all, no one takes down a man like Richard Evans without consequences. But she wasn't prepared for just how deep the corruption ran. The media turns the narrative against them. The morning after Evans' public apology and donation announcement, Monica was sipping her coffee, flipping through her phone when she saw the first hit piece. TV breaking news. Mall owner and wife use racial incident to push out business rival. Her stomach dropped as she clicked the article. The headline wasn't even the worst part. The entire story had been twisted, painting Monica and David as opportunists who had exaggerated the situation to force Evans out and strengthen their control over the mall. More headlines followed. Loudspeaker, was it really racism? New questions emerge in the Kingston Jewelers scandal. Loudspeaker, business power couple uses racial tension to their advantage. Evans speaks out. Loudspeaker, the fall of Kingston Jewelers, but was it fair? Monica's fingers tightened around her phone. Are you seeing this? She muttered to David, who had just walked into the kitchen. David, still half dressed in his tailored slacks and unbuttoned dress shirt, grabbed his phone and scanned the headlines. His jaw tightened immediately. I knew Evans wouldn't go down quietly, he said, voice calm but laced with fury. Monica exhaled sharply. He's trying to turn this into a PR war. David nodded, and from the looks of it, it's working. Evans strikes back, a war of influence. By noon, Evans had done exactly what Monica feared. He went on national television, playing the victim. On the screen, he sat in an expensive office, his expression carefully rehearsed to look both regretful and unfairly maligned. I made a mistake by associating with Kingston Jewelers, Evans said, his voice dripping with false humility. But let's be honest, was what happened to Mrs. Carter truly racial discrimination? Or was it an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion? Monica felt her blood boil. But it got worse. The truth is, Evans continued, the Carters have been trying to push me out of the mall for years. Maybe this was just the excuse they needed to finally make it happen. A well-placed lie. Monica knew it was a lie. David knew it was a lie. But the public? Some people would believe anything if it fit the right narrative. Online attacks and death threats. By that evening, Monica's social media was on fire, but not in a good way. Her inbox was flooded with messages. And not all of them were supportive. Speech balloon. You ruined a man's career over nothing. Speech balloon. Another race baiter looking for attention. Speech balloon. Disgusting. Just say you wanted power and move on. Speech balloon. People like you are the reason this country is divided. And then, red circle unknown number. We know where you live. Monica froze. Her hands went cold as she stared at the message. Then, another one. Red circle unknown number. Better watch your back. Her breath caught in her throat. She immediately dialed David, her fingers shaking. We need to talk. Now. The danger becomes real. Within 20 minutes, David was home, his security team already in motion. Monica sat on the couch, gripping her phone as she showed him the messages. David's expression darkened immediately. "This isn't just PR anymore," he said. "Evans is stirring up something dangerous. This is harassment," Monica muttered. "And maybe worse." David exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw. "I'll handle it." Monica raised an eyebrow. "You're going to handle anonymous death threats?" David's eyes flickered dangerously. "I'm going to make sure Evans knows that if anything happens to you, there won't be enough money in the world to save him." The tipping point, a physical attack. 2 nights later, Monica was leaving a charity event when it happened. She was walking to her car in a secured parking lot. Her driver just steps away when suddenly, a man in a dark hoodie rushed toward her. Too fast, too sudden. For a split second, she thought he was just a random pedestrian. Then, she saw the knife. Everything slowed down. She barely had time to react before her security tackled him to the ground. Monica stumbled back, her pulse hammering in her ears. The attacker struggled, but her security team had him pinned instantly. "Call the police," someone yelled. Monica's hands shook violently as she pulled out her phone. The man screamed obscenities, thrashing as he was cuffed. "You people ruin everything," he spat. "You think you're gonna take us down? You won't." Monica felt her stomach drop. This wasn't random. This was Evans doing. The final straw, time to end this. By the time Monica got home, she was still shaken, but her fear had turned into something else. Rage. Evans had gone too far. This wasn't just about business or reputation anymore, this was war. She sat across from David, her hands clenching into fists. "We're going after him, full force." David met her gaze, his own burning with the same fury. "Then let's do it right," he said. "Let's end him." And just like that, the gloves were off. The final battle, justice served, the ultimate showdown, victory and consequences. Monica Carter sat in her home office, staring at the manila folder in front of her. Inside was everything, every shady deal, every bribe, every cover-up tied to Richard Evans. For years, he had operated like a king, manipulating businesses, ruining lives, and escaping consequences. But now, it was his turn to fall. David stood beside her, his expression calm but razor-sharp. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Monica nodded once, her eyes burning with determination. "I'm done playing by the rules." She picked up her phone and called the one person who could destroy Evans publicly. The press conference, exposing Evans for good. By noon the next day, the media frenzy was in full force. Monica and David stood at the podium outside Carter Enterprises. Cameras flashing, microphones pointed their way. Millions of people were watching. Monica inhaled deeply, then spoke. "Over the past several weeks, my husband and I have been targeted by a corrupt businessman who has used intimidation, bribery, and even violence to try to silence us." The reporters leaned in, their pens moving furiously. "Today, we're here to say, enough is enough." Monica pulled out a thick stack of documents, lifting them for the cameras to see. "These are the receipts of Richard Evans' illegal activities, fraud, tax evasion, bribery, and deliberate attempts to sabotage businesses that wouldn't bow to his demands." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then, chaos erupted. Reporters shouted over each other. "Mrs. Carter, do you have proof of your claims? Are you accusing Richard Evans of attempted harm? How deep does this conspiracy go?" Monica raised a hand, calm and unwavering. "Yes, we have proof, and all of it is being turned over to federal authorities as we speak." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Richard Evans thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. The downfall of Richard Evans. Within hours, Evans' entire empire collapsed. Red Circle breaking news. Business tycoon Richard Evans under investigation for corruption and fraud. Red Circle social media erupts. Hashtag Evans exposed trends #1 nationwide. Red Circle investors pull out. Evans' fortune crumbles as stocks plummet. And then, the final blow. Red Circle FBI raid. Federal agents seize documents from Evans' corporate offices. Monica and David watched from their penthouse, their phones buzzing with congratulations, messages of support, and even apologies from past critics. David turned to Monica, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did it." Monica let out a slow breath. No, she corrected. We survived it. Justice is served, but at a cost. 2 weeks later, Richard Evans was officially indicted on multiple charges. But just when it seemed like everything was over, the phone rang. Monica answered, and the voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. You think you won? It was Evans. Monica's grip on the phone tightened. You're done, Richard. A dark chuckle came through the line. There will always be another one of me. Monica, this fight never ends. Monica exhaled, then said the words that ended him for good. Neither do people like me. She hung up. The legacy of the fight. 1 month later, Kingston Jewelers was replaced. In its place, a black-owned, women-led fine jewelry store, funded by the Carter Foundation, ensuring equal opportunities for every customer who walked through its doors. The mall thrived, with businesses of all backgrounds flourishing, no longer under the thumb of a corrupt billionaire. And Monica? She used the momentum to expand her advocacy work, helping other businesses fight back against corporate corruption and systemic injustice. Because Richard Evans was right about one thing. There would always be more like him. But now, there would always be more like Monica, too. And that was how real change happened. Lessons from Monica Carter's story, standing up against injustice. Monica Carter's story isn't just a thrilling battle for justice. It's a reflection of real-life struggles that many people face every day. Discrimination, corruption, and power imbalances exist in every industry. And while not everyone has the resources Monica and David had, the principles they stood for remain universal. The biggest lesson? Never stay silent in the face of injustice. Whether it's workplace discrimination, corporate corruption, or unfair treatment, speaking up is the first step toward change, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Persistence, strategy, and integrity can turn the tide. Another key takeaway? Power is not just about wealth, it's about influence and unity. Monica didn't take Evans down alone. She leveraged the media, legal experts, and public support. Change happens when people stand together. Lastly, Monica's fight reminds us that success isn't just about winning battles, it's about creating lasting impact. She didn't just expose corruption, she built a foundation to empower others. So ask yourself, what injustice in your world needs to be challenged? Because real change doesn't start with the powerful. It starts with you.